Your home, your sanctuary. But what happens when the walls themselves seem to breathe with an unseen presence, or the silence is broken by something utterly inexplicable? Welcome, dear tenant, to Nightmare True Horror. Tonight, we unlock 7 true tales from the seemingly ordinary world of apartment living, where the greatest terror can be found just beyond your own locked door. What unsettling secrets do your own hallways hold? The comments are open for your chilling confessions. If the thought of what truly lurks in the unit next door, or perhaps even your own, sends a shiver down your spine, consider making this your permanent residence. A subscription ensures you're always home for the horror. Lock your doors. Dim the lights. The stories we've gathered tonight are insidious, and the most disturbing truth often reveals itself in the quietest, final moments. My apartment was my sanctuary. A 5th-floor walk-up in a city that never slept. It was the one place I could find silence, or so I thought. The building was old, with the kind of thin walls that let you hear your neighbors' arguments and bad TV habits, but the unit directly above mine, 6B, had been vacant for the 3 months I'd lived there. A quiet, empty buffer between me and the rest of the world. The first time I heard the footsteps, I was working late on a freelance project. The only light in the room, the glow of my monitor. It was a slow, heavy, back and forth pacing. Thud, thud, like a caged animal wearing heavy boots. I checked the time, 2:15 a.m. My heart gave a little lurch. The landlord must have finally found a new tenant. An inconsiderate, insomniac tenant. It was always the same rhythm, the same path, from one end of the room directly above my bedroom to the other. It started to feel less like someone walking and more like a grim, relentless patrol. The sound began to wear on me. A constant, low-level thrum of anxiety. After a week, I'd had enough. I caught the building manager, a perpetually tired-looking man named Mr. Henderson, in the lobby. The new tenant in 6B, I said, trying to keep the exhaustion out of my voice. They pays all night. Could you ask them to keep it down? Mr. Henderson frowned, his brow furrowing. 6B, that's not possible, son. That unit's empty. Has been for months. The last tenant was evicted, and we haven't even shown it yet. He gave me a look that was a mixture of pity and suspicion. Old building. Pipes make a lot of noise. His words did not comfort me. In fact, they terrified me. I knew what I was hearing wasn't pipes. That night, the pacing started right on schedule. Thud, thud. Each step now felt like a hammer blow against my sanity. It wasn't a new neighbor. It was a ghost, or something worse. The sounds became more varied. A scraping, like a heavy chair being dragged across a bare wood floor. A soft, dry cough that seemed to echo in the dead of night. I started sleeping with headphones in, but I couldn't escape the feeling of presence, of a life being lived in the empty space just a few feet above my head. I began to feel watched, even in the bright light of day. I'd be sitting on my couch, and a sudden chill would wash over me. The primal certainty that a pair of eyes was on me. I complained to Mr. Henderson again. This time, he was less patient. Look, he said, his voice tight with annoyance. I'll go up there myself. He came back 10 minutes later, shaking his head. Empty, dusty, not a soul. You need to get some sleep. He was right. I was becoming unraveled. I started doubting my own ears, my own mind. Was I just stressed? Was the city finally getting to me? But the sounds were so real, so tangible. The breaking point came a week later. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the relentless pacing. Then, the footsteps stopped, directly over my bed. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. Then a new sound began. A low, whining hum that grew into a high-pitched, grinding screech. It was a drill. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just a sound from the apartment above. It was coming through the ceiling. I scrambled out of bed, my heart pounding in my throat, and flicked on the light. On the ceiling, directly above where my head had been on the pillow, a small shower of plaster dust was falling. Like a gentle, horrifying snow. This wasn't a ghost. It wasn't my imagination. This was real. And it was happening right now. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My voice had choked, trembling whisper as I tried to explain the impossible situation. As I was on the phone, a small, perfectly round hole appeared in the ceiling. The drilling stopped. For a moment, there was only the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then, something dark and round was pushed through the hole. A tiny camera lens, the kind used in spy equipment. It swiveled slightly, focusing on the bed, on the indent my head had made on the pillow. The person in the empty apartment wasn't just making noise. They were building a nest, a predator's blind, from which to watch their prey. And I was the prey. I didn't wait for the police. I ran out of my apartment, out of the building, and didn't stop until I was standing on the corner, shivering in the cold night air, watching the flashing lights of the patrol cars converge on my building. The police had to break down the door to 6B. As Mr. Henderson had said, the apartment was empty of furniture, but it was far from empty. In the center of the room, directly above my bedroom, was a small, powerful drill on a tripod, aimed at the floor. Next to it was a sophisticated array of surveillance equipment. Monitors, hard drives, and high-powered listening devices, all wired into the building's electrical system. They found blueprints of the building, with my unit, 5B, circled in red ink. On a small table, they found a collection of photographs, candid shots of me, taken from a distance, me getting my mail, me leaving for work, me coming home with groceries. The man who had lived there, an unemployed audio engineer who had been evicted for not paying his rent, was the primary suspect. He had apparently kept a copy of the key. He had been sneaking in at night, living in the empty unit, slowly, meticulously, turning the space into an observation deck. He was never found. He had vanished as completely as a ghost. I live on the top floor of a new building now. There's no one above me. It's the only way I can sleep. I've tried to put it behind me, to convince myself that it was a freak occurrence, a 1 in a billion chance. But last week, I got a certified letter. The return address was a P.O. box I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a building permit from the city. It was an application for structural modifications to the roof of my new secure apartment building. At the bottom of the permit, in the space for the contractor's signature, was a single, neatly printed name. The name of the man who had lived in 6B. That story reminds us that not all monsters lurk in the dark. Sometimes, they're just a floor away, but your next true apartment nightmare is even closer. The converted warehouse on Pine Street had everything I wanted in my first real apartment. Exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and enough character to justify the premium rent in downtown Seattle. As a freelance investigative journalist, I needed a quiet space to work on long-form pieces, and the building's thick walls provided perfect insulation from the city's constant hum. I was returning from a late coffee run, keys jingling as I climbed to the 4th floor, when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic scratching sound coming from the end of the hallway. The sound was deliberate, almost like fingernails against wood, repeating in a pattern that felt desperate rather than random. It seemed to emanate from behind an unmarked door I'd noticed, but never really considered. Just another piece of the building's industrial aesthetic, I'd assumed. But now, standing in the dimly lit corridor with my laptop bag weighing heavy on my shoulder, the sound made my skin crawl. The scratching continued for 30 seconds before stopping abruptly, leaving behind a silence that felt loaded with tension. Who was behind that door? And why did their activity sound so frantic, so secretive? My name is Rebecca Torres, and after 5 years covering crime stories for various publications, I've developed instincts about when something doesn't add up. This building housed 43 loft apartments according to the lease documents, but I'd only ever seen 42 units with visible numbers. That unmarked door sat exactly where another apartment should be, positioned between 4G and 4E, with no explanation for the missing 4H. I tried casual inquiries with neighbors, but their responses were strangely uniform. Storage space, they'd say, or building utilities, always with the same dismissive tone and quick subject change. The building manager, a nervous man named Carl Hendricks, became visibly uncomfortable when I asked about it directly. "Nothing that concerns tenants," he'd mutter, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact. But my journalistic background had taught me to recognize patterns, and the pattern here was deliberate ignorance. Everyone knew about the door, everyone had been told to ignore it, and everyone was complying with suspicious obedience. The scratching sounds became a nightly occurrence, always around 11 p.m., always lasting less than a minute. Sometimes I'd hear muffled voices, one pleading, one harsh and commanding. The conversations were too quiet to make out words, but the emotional content was unmistakable. Someone was being held against their will. I started researching the building's history, digging through city records and old news archives. The warehouse had been converted to apartments in 2019, but the renovation permits showed some interesting discrepancies. The original plans included 44 units, but the final inspection documents listed only 43. Somehow, one apartment had been removed from the official records during construction. More disturbing were the missing person reports I found. Over the past 3 years, 7 young women had disappeared from the surrounding neighborhood. All between ages 22 and 28, all living alone, all last seen within 6 blocks of my building. The cases had gone cold, attributed to voluntary disappearances or human trafficking networks that moved victims out of state. The breakthrough came when I befriended Maria, the night cleaning supervisor. After weeks of casual conversations, she finally opened up about what she called the special arrangement. Unit 4E officially doesn't exist, she whispered, glancing around nervously. "But I still have to clean it twice a week. Mr. Hendricks pays me extra to keep quiet about what I see in there." "What do you see?" Her face went pale. "Medical equipment, restraints. Sometimes there are people inside. Young women who look sick, drugged. They never speak, just stare with empty eyes." My blood ran cold. "How long has this been going on?" "Since the building opened. The owner, Mr. Webb, he runs some kind of private medical practice. Says he's helping troubled women with experimental therapy. But those women, they don't look like they're getting better." I knew I had to get inside that room, but I needed evidence that would hold up in court. That night, I waited until the building was quiet, then used lock-picking skills I'd learned, covering a story about home security. The door opened with surprising ease. Whoever was inside wasn't worried about escape attempts. The apartment was set up like a medical facility, but wrong in every detail. Examination tables were equipped with restraints. IV stands held bags of unknown substances. Along one wall, 4 hospital beds contained young women in various states of consciousness, all connected to monitoring equipment that beeped softly in the darkness. In the center of the room stood Dr. Marcus Webb, a tall man in his 50s wearing surgical scrubs. He was adjusting controls on a machine that looked like electroshock therapy equipment from decades past. "I was wondering when you'd finally work up the courage," he said without turning around. "You've been quite persistent in your inquiries, Miss Torres." I tried to back toward the door, but it had closed behind me. "Electronically controlled," I realized. "You're conducting illegal medical experiments," I said, trying to keep my voice steady while secretly activating my phone's recording app. "I'm advancing psychiatric treatment," he corrected. "These women suffer from various personality disorders, addiction issues, behavioral problems. Traditional therapy failed them, so their families brought them to me for more intensive intervention." "Their families?" I gestured toward the restrained women. "These are the missing persons from the neighborhood. Their families are looking for them." Webb's expression hardened. "Their families paid me to make their problems disappear. Runaway daughters, drug addicts, women who brought shame to respectable households. I provide a service. Permanent behavioral modification through controlled psychological reconditioning." The clinical way he described torture made my stomach turn. "You're holding them prisoner. I'm providing treatment they can't receive anywhere else. The process takes months, sometimes years, but the results are remarkable. Complete personality restructuring, elimination of problematic behaviors, total compliance with authority figures." One of the women on the beds turned her head toward me, and I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Her eyes were completely vacant, as if her personality had been erased entirely. The families pay extremely well for this service, Webb continued, especially when the alternative is having their daughters arrested, institutionalized, or worse. I offer them a clean solution. Their troubled family member disappears, and eventually returns as a completely different person. Quiet, obedient, manageable. I realized with growing horror that this wasn't just kidnapping. It was a business model. Wealthy families were paying to have their inconvenient relatives psychologically destroyed and rebuilt. You're going to be my next case study, Webb said, moving toward a cabinet filled with syringes. A journalist who couldn't leave well enough alone. Your editor will receive a note explaining that you've decided to travel abroad for an extended research project. I grabbed a metal tray from the nearest table and hurled it at the window. The glass shattered, and I screamed as loudly as I could while diving through the opening onto the fire escape. 4 stories up, but the metal grating held my weight as I scrambled down toward the street. Behind me, I could hear Webb shouting into a radio. Code red. Building security. Subject has escaped. I reached the ground level and ran straight to the nearest police station. My phone recording still running, capturing every word of Webb's confession. The raid that followed uncovered one of the most sophisticated human trafficking operations in Washington state history. Webb had been operating for over a decade, using wealthy families' shame about troubled relatives to build a network of behavioral modification facilities across the Pacific Northwest. The investigation revealed that building manager Carl Hendricks was part of the operation, helping to identify potential victims among the building's young female tenants. The missing apartment had been specifically designed during construction to avoid city inspection and official documentation. 11 women were rescued from various facilities, though their psychological recovery would take years. Webb was sentenced to life without parole. But the case exposed a much larger network of illegal psychiatric facilities, catering to wealthy clients who wanted family problems to simply disappear. I moved out of the building immediately, unable to continue living in a place where such horrors had been hidden behind a door that officially didn't exist. The experience fundamentally changed how I see urban spaces. How many other unmarked doors are hiding unspeakable secrets, protected by money and willful ignorance? Because the most terrifying truth I learned is that in America's anonymous cities, people can disappear not through random violence, but through calculated business transactions. Families with money and shame can make inconvenient relatives vanish, and institutions will help them do it, as long as the price is right. And sometimes, late at night in my new apartment, I still hear that desperate scratching sound, and I wonder how many other people are trapped behind doors that don't officially exist, waiting for someone brave enough to acknowledge what everyone else chooses to ignore. The walls of these buildings hold more than just tenants. They hold secrets, and the next true horror from the city's concrete jungle is about to be revealed. The key turned easily in the lock of apartment 4B as I pushed open the door to what would be my home for the next 6 months, carrying a duffel bag and the emotional baggage of a relationship that had imploded spectacularly just 3 weeks earlier. My friend Rachel's downtown Phoenix loft smelled like vanilla candles and coffee. Exactly the kind of sophisticated urban space I dreamed of, while trapped in suburban domesticity with my ex-boyfriend. That's when I heard it. A soft scratching sound from somewhere deeper in the apartment, like fingernails dragging across wood or metal. The sound lasted maybe 3 seconds before stopping abruptly, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the distant rumble of traffic from the street below. I set my bag down in the entryway and listened, but the scratching didn't repeat. Probably just the building settling or a neighbor moving furniture, I told myself. But as I stood in Rachel's living room, surrounded by her carefully curated decor and floor-to-ceiling windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from the building across the street, studying my arrival with predatory interest. My name is Kelly Martinez, and I'm a 28-year-old marketing coordinator who just escaped a toxic 2-year relationship with a man who'd become increasingly controlling and possessive. It was November 2023, and Rachel's offer to swap apartments had seemed like a gift from heaven. She needed to house sit for her parents in Scottsdale while they traveled to Europe, and I desperately needed space to rebuild my life away from the memories and surveillance of my ex. Rachel's apartment was everything mine wasn't. Modern, stylish, located in the trendy Roosevelt district, where young professionals gathered at craft breweries and artisan coffee shops. The building was a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls, industrial fixtures, and the kind of urban sophistication that made you feel like you were living in a magazine spread. But from the moment I stepped inside, something felt wrong. Not supernatural or mystical, just the nagging sense that this space held secrets I wasn't prepared to handle. The first suspicious sign came when I was unpacking in the bedroom and found a note tucked behind the dresser. "Stop ignoring me. We need to talk." And the handwriting was masculine, aggressive, with letters pressed so hard into the paper that they'd nearly torn through. The note looked recent, but Rachel had never mentioned any relationship drama or unwanted attention. I texted her about it, but she was already in Europe, and the time difference meant responses were delayed and brief. Probably just some guy from the dating apps. Nothing serious. Enjoy the apartment. But over the next few days, more notes appeared in places where they shouldn't have been. Slipped under the door, tucked into magazines, even taped to the bathroom mirror. All from M. All increasingly demanding and frustrated. "You can't avoid me forever. I know you're reading these. We had something special." The building's security was supposed to be excellent. Keycard access, doorman during business hours, cameras in all common areas. But somehow was getting access to the apartment, leaving his messages like breadcrumbs of obsession. I started paying closer attention to my surroundings. I noticed things that made my skin crawl. A man in his 30s often stood across the street, smoking cigarettes and watching the building's entrance. The same man appeared in the coffee shop where I worked remotely, always at a table with a clear view of my laptop screen. When I left for errands, I'd catch glimpses of him following at a distance. Never close enough to confirm my suspicions, but always present enough to keep me on edge. The scratching sounds I'd heard on my first day became a nightly occurrence, always around 2 a.m., always seeming to come from inside the walls. When I investigated, I discovered that M had somehow gained access to the building's utility areas. Fresh scratches on the wall behind the bedroom suggested someone had been working to create a hole large enough to watch through. The escalation happened quickly. Notice became phone calls to the apartment's landline. Heavy breathing, whispered threats, demands that Rachel stop playing games and meet him. When I answered and explained that I wasn't Rachel, the caller became enraged. "You're lying," the voice said. "I've been watching you. I know your routines, your schedule, what you wear to bed. You can't hide from me forever." He knew details about my life that he couldn't have learned just from watching the building. My work schedule, my exercise routine, even personal information about my recent breakup. Someone had been conducting systematic surveillance, and Rachel's apartment had become the center of an increasingly dangerous obsession. I tried calling Rachel again, but her European vacation had taken her to remote areas with limited phone service. Her last message was cheerful and oblivious. "Having an amazing time in Tuscany. Hope you're settling in well." The building's management was sympathetic but unhelpful. They'd received no complaints about security breaches, and the doorman insisted that no unauthorized visitors had accessed the building. But I knew someone was getting inside, someone who understood the building's systems well enough to move around undetected. The situation reached a breaking point when I came home from work to find my clothes arranged differently in the closet. Someone had been in the apartment while I was gone, touching my personal belongings, leaving evidence of their presence. On the bathroom mirror, written in what looked like lipstick, was a message that made my blood freeze. "Stop pretending to be someone else." That night, I barricaded the bedroom door and called the police. But when officers arrived to take my statement, they found something I hadn't expected. Evidence that Rachel herself might not have been entirely honest about her situation. Hidden in a desk drawer was a restraining order against Michael Torres, issued 3 months earlier. The order detailed a pattern of stalking behavior, harassment, and threats from a man she'd briefly dated, who'd become obsessed with her. The restriction required him to stay at least 500 feet away from her home and workplace. But Rachel had never mentioned any of this when she'd offered the apartment swap. She'd presented it as a simple favor between friends, not as a way to escape a dangerous stalker by putting me in her place. As I read through the legal documents, I realized with growing horror that Michael Torres hadn't been deterred by the restraining order. He'd been watching the apartment, waiting for Rachel to return, and when I'd moved in instead, he'd assumed she was trying to evade him by changing her appearance and identity. Every note, every phone call, every instance of surveillance had been directed at someone he believed was Rachel hiding from him. And now he was escalating his behavior, growing more frustrated and dangerous with each day that she refused to acknowledge their relationship. The police took the situation seriously once they understood the full scope of the threat. They explained that stalkers often become more violent when they believe their victims are actively evading them. And my presence in Rachel's apartment had triggered exactly that response. "He thinks you're her," the detective explained, "and he's getting angry that his usual methods aren't working. That makes you extremely dangerous." They arranged for increased patrols around the building and helped me contact Rachel through emergency channels. When she finally called back from Italy, her reaction was a mixture of guilt and terror. "I thought he'd given up," she said, her voice shaking. "I got the restraining order and he stopped contacting me directly. I thought it was over." But Michael Torres hadn't given up. He'd just gotten better at hiding his surveillance. The building's maintenance records showed that he'd been employed as a temporary contractor just 2 months earlier, giving him access to security codes, utility areas, and enough knowledge of the building's layout to move around undetected. The confrontation came 3 nights later when I heard my keycard being used at the front door. Through the peephole, I could see a man matching Michael's description from the restraining order documents. But he was wearing a maintenance uniform and carrying tools that suggested legitimate access to the building. He knocked on the door, calling out in a voice that tried to sound professional. "Building maintenance. Need to check the plumbing in your unit." But I could see the rage in his eyes, the barely contained violence of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. This wasn't a maintenance call. This was the culmination of an obsession that had been building, while Rachel was thousands of miles away. I called 911 and activated the building's emergency alert system while hiding in the bedroom. Through the walls, I could hear him trying to force the lock, muttering angrily about Rachel's refusal to talk to him, about how he was going to make her understand their connection. Police arrived within minutes, but Michael had vanished as quickly as he'd appeared. They found evidence of his presence, scratches on the door frame, tools scattered in the hallway, but no sign of the man himself. The investigation revealed that Michael Torres had been planning this confrontation for weeks, using his knowledge of the building's systems to prepare multiple entry points and escape routes. He'd been watching from various locations, documenting my routines, waiting for the perfect opportunity to corner who he believed was Rachel. He was arrested 2 days later at his workplace, where police found extensive surveillance photos of the building, detailed notes about my daily schedule, and plans for what he called a conversation that would fix everything. Michael was charged with stalking, harassment, breaking and entering, and violation of a restraining order. During his interrogation, he insisted that I was Rachel using a disguise to avoid him, even when presented with evidence of my real identity. I moved out of Rachel's apartment immediately and into a hotel while she cut her European trip short to deal with the legal proceedings. Our friendship never fully recovered. The trust had been broken by her failure to warn me about the danger I was walking into. Rachel later admitted that she had been receiving signs of continued surveillance, but had convinced herself that Michael had lost interest. The apartment swap had seemed like a perfect solution. She could escape to Europe while someone else maintained her lease, and hopefully Michael would move on to other obsessions. But stalkers don't move on that easily. 6 months later, I received a letter forwarded through my lawyer. "No return address," postmarked from the county jail where Michael was serving his sentence. Inside was a photograph of Rachel's building taken from across the street, with a handwritten note, "Still watching, Kelly. Still waiting for the truth about what happened to Rachel, because some obsessions never end. They just adapt to new circumstances, find new targets, and wait for opportunities to resume their pursuit. And sometimes, when you try to help a friend escape from danger, you discover that danger has a way of following whoever takes their place." The apartment swap that was supposed to give me a fresh start had instead made me a target of someone else's unfinished business. someone else's delusions, someone else's refusal to accept that no means forever. And somewhere in the system, Michael Torres is still planning, still believing that the right conversation will fix everything, still convinced that someone owes him the relationship he imagined but never actually had. You might think your apartment is safe, but these stories prove otherwise. Another real-life nightmare from the urban landscape awaits. I turned my key in the lock and heard it. A soft creak from inside my apartment, like someone had just shifted their weight on the old hardwood floor. I froze with my hand still on the doorknob listening. The sound came again, definitely from my living room, followed by what sounded like fabric brushing against leather. My heart hammered as I slowly pushed the door open. The apartment was empty, exactly as I'd left it that morning, but my favorite coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter instead of in the dishwasher, where I always put it, and the thermostat had been adjusted to 74 degrees. I never set it above 72. Someone had been in my home. I'm Rachel, 29, working as a social worker in Richmond, Virginia. I'd been renting this one-bedroom apartment in a converted Victorian house for about 6 months. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, was a retired postal worker in his 60s who lived in the main house next door with his adult son, Derek. Peterson had been upfront about keeping a spare key for emergencies, burst pipes, maintenance issues, that sort of thing. It seemed reasonable at the time. The house had been divided into 3 apartments, and mine was on the 2nd floor with a separate entrance. Peterson was a decent landlord, always quick to fix problems, respectful of boundaries. His son Derek was another story, probably mid-30s, unemployed, still living with his father. I'd seen him around the property, always watching from windows or lingering near the mailboxes when I came home. He never made direct eye contact, just observed with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more small discrepancies. My bathroom towel folded differently than I remembered. The TV remote on the wrong side of the couch. Books on my nightstand rearranged slightly. Each incident was so minor I questioned my own memory. Was I being paranoid? Maybe I was just stressed from work, losing track of small details. But then I found the indentation. Coming home one evening, I noticed a depression in my living room armchair cushion, perfectly formed as if someone had been sitting there for hours. The fabric was still slightly warm to the touch. I lived alone, hadn't had visitors in weeks, and I always sat on the couch, never the armchair. Someone had been in my apartment that day, sitting in my chair, and they'd left recently enough that their body heat remained. I called Peterson immediately. Has anyone been in my apartment today? For maintenance or anything? No, nothing scheduled, he said, sounding genuinely confused. Is everything okay? I explained about the moved items, the warm chair. Peterson listened carefully, then offered to come over and check the locks, make sure everything was secure. When he arrived 20 minutes later, Derek was with him. Derek knows the building better than anyone, Peterson explained. He helped me renovate these apartments. Derek stood silently in my doorway while his father examined the locks. His eyes moved constantly, cataloging everything. My furniture arrangement, the books on my shelves, the photos on my refrigerator. When Peterson declared the lock secure and suggested I might just be forgetting small things due to work stress, Derek finally spoke. Sometimes people imagine things when they're anxious, he said softly, his voice unnaturally flat. The mind plays tricks. The way he said it, with that slight smile, made my skin crawl. Like he was sharing a private joke with himself. After they left, I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek had been studying my apartment, not checking for security issues. The way his gaze lingered on personal items, how he seemed to know where everything belonged. I decided to take action. I bought a small wireless camera online, the kind designed for home security, motion activated with smartphone alerts. I hid it on my bookshelf, angled toward the living room, then spent the next few days at work anxiously checking my phone for notifications. On Thursday afternoon at 2:17 p.m., I got the alert. Motion detected in living room. My hands shook as I opened the app and connected to the live feed. Derek Peterson was sitting in my armchair. He wasn't rifling through my belongings or searching for valuables. He was just sitting there, perfectly still, staring at my coffee table like he was memorizing every detail. Occasionally, he'd lean forward to touch something. A magazine, a coaster, my TV remote, then carefully place it back in the exact position. I watched in horror as he got up and walked to my kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stood there, examining the contents without taking anything. He moved to my bathroom, spending several minutes just looking at my toiletries, my shower curtain, the towels hanging on the rack. This had been going on for months while I was at work, helping families in crisis. Derek Peterson was in my home, touching my things, breathing my air, violating every aspect of my privacy. The footage showed him returning to the armchair, where he sat motionless for another hour before finally leaving. As he walked toward the door, he paused and looked directly at where I'd hidden the camera, his expression unreadable. My blood turned to ice. He knew about the camera. I left work immediately and drove home, my mind racing. How long had he known I was watching? What else had he discovered? When I unlocked my apartment door, I knew instantly that something was different. The air felt charged, like someone had just been there. The camera was gone from the bookshelf. In its place was a folded piece of paper with my name written in careful block letters. Inside, Derek had written, "I know you've been watching me watch you. It's exciting, isn't it? Having a secret like this between us. I've been taking care of your space, learning about you, keeping you company when you're not here. Don't ruin this by involving others. We understand each other now." My hands trembled as I read the note again. The casual tone, the implication that this was somehow mutual, made me physically sick. How many hours had he spent in my apartment? What did he know about my routines, my habits, my life? I called the police immediately. Detective Morgan listened to my story with growing concern, especially when I showed her the note and explained about the hidden camera footage I'd captured before Derek found it. "This is criminal trespass and stalking," she said. "We need to arrest him immediately." But when they went to the Peterson house, Derek was gone. His father claimed he'd left that morning for a job interview in another state, but couldn't provide specifics. A search of Derek's room revealed dozens of photographs of my apartment building, taken from various angles and distances. Some showed me coming and going. Others captured details of my daily routines through my windows. Most disturbing were the notebooks. Pages and pages of observations about my life, written in the same careful block letters as the note. Rachel leaves for work at 7:45 a.m., returns between 6:37 p.m., always checks mail before going upstairs, drinks coffee from the blue mug every morning, showers at night, never in the morning, watches Netflix on Tuesday evenings, usually true crime documentaries. The level of detail was staggering. He documented my life like a research project, noting patterns I wasn't even aware of myself. Peterson was horrified when police showed him the evidence. I had no idea, he kept repeating. He seemed harmless, just quiet. I never thought. I'm so sorry. The police investigation revealed that Derek had been using his father's spare key to enter all 3 apartments in the building over the past year. I wasn't his only victim. He'd been systematically invading the privacy of everyone in the building, though I seemed to be his primary focus. They never found Derek. A warrant was issued for his arrest, but he'd vanished completely. Peterson changed all the locks immediately and gave me the only key to my apartment. But the damage was done. Every creak, every shadow, every slight change in my environment made me paranoid that he'd returned. I moved out 2 months later, but even in my new apartment, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. I check my locks obsessively, rearrange my furniture frequently, and I've never given anyone a spare key, because I know now that privacy is an illusion, that someone can study your life so thoroughly they know you better than you know yourself. And that once that boundary is crossed, you never feel truly alone again. Sometimes I wonder if Derek found a new building, new victims, new spare keys to copy, and sometimes, late at night, I'll find a coffee mug in the wrong place, or a towel folded differently. And I'll remember that some people never really leave. They just learn to watch more carefully.